The salvage yard at Fresno Iron and Recovery on South Elm Avenue smelled of iron and old rain, the kind of cold that settles into metal and stays. 20 cars sat in a crooked row behind the chain link, hoods sprung, wheel wells eaten through, paint the color of dried blood. Victoria Hale, CEO of Hale Automotive Group, stood at the fence in a camel coat and laughed. Someone actually bid on this worthless junk, she said, loud enough for the press photographer beside her to hear. $1,500. For scrap. The man who had placed that bid stood 30 feet away, his 7-year-old daughter Maisie pressed against his hip, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. His name was Marcus Webb. He did not respond to Victoria Hale's laughter. He did not look up. He did not know that she had already signed the scrapping order for those 20 cars 6 weeks earlier, and that the signature would become the most expensive mistake of her career. What she did not know was that Marcus Webb had spent 11 years as a lead restoration engineer at Shelby American's Heritage Division, that his hands had touched more authenticated GT 500s than any other living technician, and that he had walked away from all of it the morning Claire's funeral ended, because Maisie needed a father who came home, stay, because Victoria Hale would regret every word. The chassis plate on the first car was buried under 40 years of grime, and Marcus found it the way he found everything, slowly, without hurry, with a lamp held at an angle most people would not think to try. He had learned that patience was not a virtue in restoration work. It was a method, the kind of method that Claire used to call his superpower, back when she was alive to call it anything. That was before the diagnosis, before the 18 months that followed. Before Maisie was 6 years old and asking where Mama had gone, and Marcus had looked at his daughter's face and understood that no commission, no provenance certificate, no authenticated GT 500 was worth the risk of her losing him too. He closed the Heritage shop account. He opened Webb's garage on Oleander Street in Fresno, a 2-bay operation that smelled of rubber and old coffee, where he did oil changes and brake jobs, and occasionally, quietly, something more. Roy Castillo had worked the second bay for 3 years, a Capac man in his late 50s, with a gray mustache and the habit of arriving 7 minutes early every single day. He did not know Marcus's full history. He knew enough. He knew that when Marcus looked at a car, something in his posture changed, a stillness that was different from ordinary stillness, more focused, the way a hawk goes quiet before it moves. Victoria Hale had not known any of this when she stood at the fence and laughed. Her press photographer had captured the moment, and the image ran in the Fresno Business Journal. Beneath the headline, Hale Automotive Clears Dead Weight. The caption named the buyer only as a local mechanic. What the photograph also captured in the background was Marcus Webb, writing something in a small notebook. He was not writing a shopping list. He was writing chassis numbers. Marcus arrived at the yard at 6:40 the first morning, before the light was fully up, and began at the far left of the row. Roy arrived at 7 and took the right end without being asked. Maisie sat on an overturned milk crate near the fence, watching. By 4 that afternoon, they had cleared and photographed the data plates on all 20 cars. 3 days later, Marcus cross-referenced the chassis sequences against a private database he had built over 11 years. At Shelby American, cross-indexed against factory shipping records, dealer invoices, and the original production logs from the San Jose assembly facility, assembled number by number over a decade. The kind of document that did not exist anywhere publicly. The sequences matched, not approximately, exactly. All 20 cars were 1967 Shelby GT 500s from a single production run, a fleet order placed by a now-defunct California dealership group that had taken delivery, stored the cars in a climate-controlled warehouse, and then lost the warehouse in a bankruptcy proceeding in 1971. The cars had moved through 3 salvage transfers since then, each time appraised as standard Mustang Hulks by evaluators who had not looked closely enough. On day 7, Roy found Marcus standing in front of car number 12, not moving. "What do you see?" Roy asked. Marcus said, "The stampings are hand-on. These weren't production line cars. These were pre-production evaluation units." Roy was quiet. How many people would know that? Marcus said, "Very few." Maisie from the milk crate said without looking up, "Daddy, are they special?" Marcus said, "Yes." She nodded, as if that settled something. Dr. Anita Pell was an automotive historian at the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles, known in the field as a person who did not issue certificates casually. Marcus sent her the chassis photographs and the registry cross-reference on day 9. He did not call her. He sent the data and waited. She called on day 11, her voice careful and measured. "Where did you get these?" Marcus said, "Fresno salvage auction." A pause. "All 20? He said, "All 20. She arrived on day 14, spent 4 hours with the cars, and when she was finished, she stood in the center of the row and looked at Marcus. "These are authenticated pre-production GT 500 evaluation units," she said. "The entire fleet. I've never seen more than 3 in one place. I'm going to issue a formal provenance certificate." The certificate was public, filed with the National Shelby Registry and the Peterson's Authentication Archive. The Fresno Business Journal ran a follow-up story. This time the caption named Marcus Webb correctly. Victoria Hale's communications director called that morning. Hale herself called that afternoon. Her voice had changed register. The easy authority was gone, replaced by something more careful, more deliberate. She said she wanted to discuss a consulting arrangement. She said the word "sorry" once, briefly, in the middle of a longer sentence, as if hoping it might pass unnoticed. Marcus said he would think about it. He hung up and went back to the car he was working on. Roy looked up from the second bay. "Was that her?" Marcus said, "Yes." Roy waited. Marcus picked up a socket wrench. She said sorry. Roy said, "Did she mean it?" Marcus said, "Doesn't matter." He went back to work. The smell inside car number 7 was copper and old rubber and something else, a faint, specific sharpness Marcus recognized before he could name it. Cutting fluid, the kind used in precision machining, the kind that did not belong in a standard production engine bay. He had authored the original installation blueprints for the Gurney Westlake cylinder head modification program during his 3rd year at Shelby American. A small experimental program largely undocumented in public records, one he had never claimed credit for publicly. That was not the kind of thing he sought. Claire had found the blueprint folder once, tucked behind a filing cabinet in the Gardena shop, and she had held it up and said, "Is this yours?" He had said yes. She had looked at him for a long moment and said, "Marcus, this is remarkable work." He had shrugged. She had put the folder back exactly where she found it, which was how she understood him. After she died, the blueprint stayed in the folder. The folder stayed in a box in the garage on Oleander Street, beneath a set of winter tires and a child's bicycle, with training wheels still attached. Hale Automotive's COO, a man named Derek Stanton, had been present at the salvage yard auction. He had stood beside Victoria Hale and spoken into her ear before she laughed, telling her that the cars represented a disposal liability and that any restoration value was speculative. He had a report in his briefcase that said something different. He did not mention the report. Over 14 days, Marcus and Roy stripped and cataloged the components. Cars 3, 11, and 15 all carried the same Gurney Westlake modifications, hand-fitted units. The machining marks still visible along the combustion chamber edges, the kind of marks left by a specific set of tools used in a specific sequence. Marcus cataloged every component in a second notebook, graph paper pages, 1 observation per line. Maisie held the lamp on the evenings she came to the shop, and on one of those evenings, she asked, "Are they good engine parts?" Marcus said, without looking, "The best." Marcus contacted the Society of Automotive Engineers Archive in Warrendale, Pennsylvania, and requested the original engineering submission records for the Gurney Westlake GT500 modification program. The archive's engineering records liaison, Carol Brandt, called the shop 12 days later. She had located the original submission file. It contained, among other documents, a set of hand-drawn installation blueprints. The author's name was on the cover sheet. It was Marcus Webb. Brandt issued a formal engineering provenance statement, linking the components in the 20 cars to the original documented program and identifying Marcus as the program's originating engineer. The trade publication ran a story naming Marcus Webb in the headline. A journalist called Stanton for comment. Stanton declined. Hale saw the story the same morning. Stanton's suppressed report surfaced in her inbox, forwarded anonymously from within her own legal department. She read the report. Then she read it again. She called Stanton into her office, and 3 people in the adjacent conference room heard her voice through the wall. It was not the voice she had used at the salvage yard fence. She called Marcus that evening, her tone quieter than more deliberate. She said she had not known about the report. She said she was sorry. She said she wanted to discuss a formal consulting arrangement around heritage component authentication. Marcus said he would consider it and did not say more than that. Roy was locking up the second bay when Marcus came back inside. "She found out," Marcus said. Roy nodded slowly. Marcus picked up the graph paper notebook and set it on the shelf above his workbench, spine out, where he could find it. "I'm going to finish the catalog," he said. He turned off the overhead light and left the lamp on. The 20 cars had been dismissed at the auction as non-running hulks, the language in the salvage yard's lot description, the language Victoria Hale's team had used in their disposal assessment, and the language the Fresno Business Journal had repeated without question. The crowd at the auction had laughed when the auctioneer read the lot description aloud, and that laughter had been captured in a video clip that ran on a local news segment that evening. The clip circulated in automotive forums over the following days, the laughter playing on loop beneath screenshots of the lot description, and in the background of that clip, barely visible, was Marcus Webb raising his bidding card. He had not been bidding on the description. He had been bidding on what he had seen in the 40 minutes before the auction opened, when he had walked the row alone in the early morning quiet, pressing palms against engine blocks, reading the specific language of 20 engines that had been parked, not destroyed. Marcus drained the first engine on day 2. The oil that came out was thick and dark, but not contaminated. No water intrusion, no metal particulate beyond what long-term static storage produced. He held the drain pan up to the shop light. Roy watched him. "Well," Marcus said, "it sat. It didn't burn." Roy understood what that meant. Marcus worked in sequence from there, 1 engine per day. The process identical each time. Drain, inspect, free the rotating assembly by hand, assess the bore. Segment. By day 9, 11 engines were running under their own power, idling in the bay with a sound that was low and even and very old. Roy stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and did not say anything for a while. Marcus arranged an independent dynamometer test through Pacific Drivetrain Verification in Sacramento, a certified facility whose test reports were admissible in insurance and legal proceedings. He transported all 20 cars over 3 days. The report was issued on day 22. All 20 drivetrains were rated functional. 17 were rated within original factory performance specifications. 3 exceeded them. The report noted that the condition of the drivetrains was inconsistent with the vehicle's external presentation and suggested that the cars had been stored under conditions significantly better than their surface rust indicated. It said everything it needed to say without saying more than that. The Pacific Drivetrain report was picked up by 2 automotive trade publications within 48 hours. One ran it alongside the Hale Automotive disposal order, which was also a public document. The juxtaposition was not editorially neutral. The scrapping order had been irreversible, signed, filed, and legally executed before Marcus's bid had even cleared. Hale had authorized the destruction of 20 functional, authenticated GT500 drivetrains for a net recovery of $0. She called Marcus that afternoon. Her voice had changed again, quieter than the previous call. The authority further back. Something that sounded like genuine discomfort in its place. She said the disposal order had been based on incomplete information. She said she wanted to make it right. She used the word sorry twice, and neither time did it hide inside a longer sentence. Marcus said he appreciated the call. He set the phone down on the workbench beside the Pacific Drivetrain report and looked at it for a moment. Roy said from the second bay, "Both times?" Marcus said, "Both times." Roy picked up a wrench. Marcus went back to work. The build records smelled of old paper and the specific staleness of a filing system no one had opened in years. Marcus sat at the work table in the back of Webb's garage with a single lamp and a magnifying loupe and the first of what would become 63 original factory build sheets, and he began to read. He had known the code since his second year at Shelby American, a shorthand developed by the San Jose assembly team to track option packages and deviation orders on fleet builds. Specialized rather than secret. The kind of notation most evaluators had never needed to learn. Marcus has spent 2 years learning them from a retired assembly supervisor named Gerald Oates, who had since died, and who had been, as far as Marcus knew, the last person outside the factory to understand the full system. Derek Stanton had commissioned a provenance assessment of the 20 cars 8 months before the auction. The assessor had flagged the build sheet codes as potentially significant, recommending further analysis by a specialist. Stanton had received the report, reviewed it, and filed it in a folder marked Pending Legal Review. The folder had not moved. He had told Hale the cars were unresolvable liabilities. He had not mentioned the codes. Over 3 weeks, Marcus cross-referenced the deviation codes against the factory option logs on his thumb drive. Roy reading the codes aloud, while Marcus checked them against the log, Maisie doing homework at the far end of the table. The pattern was unambiguous. All 20 cars had been built to a single deviation order, number D-67-114, specifying hand-fitted components, pre-production evaluation specifications, and a non-standard quality hold protocol signed by a Shelby American production supervisor and never publicly cataloged. Marcus submitted the complete cross-reference, the 63 build sheets, and the deviation order documentation to the National Automotive History Collection in Detroit. The collection's senior archivist, Thomas Vreeland, issued a formal provenance certificate for all 20 vehicles, citing Deviation Order D-67-114 and confirming authenticated pre-production fleet status. 3 independent authorities, 1 consistent conclusion. The automotive press ran the certificate alongside a timeline of the Hale Automotive Disposal Order, Stanton's suppressed assessment, and Marcus's auction bid. Hale called a press conference 2 days after the certificate was issued. She confirmed that Stanton's report had been withheld from her, that the disposal order had been executed on incomplete information, and that Stanton was no longer with the company. She called Marcus afterward and offered a formal consulting contract for Hale Automotive's Heritage Acquisition Program with full attribution and a rate she named specifically. Marcus said he would need to think about it, that he had a shop to run and a daughter to pick up from school. He set the phone down beside Thomas Vreeland's certificate and picked up his keys. Maisie was waiting at the school gate with the rabbit under her arm. Monterey in August smelled of salt air and money, the kind that arrived in linen jackets and spoke in low, certain voices about provenance and rarity. The Gooding and Company auction tent had been erected on the lawn of a private estate on Cannery Row. White canvas walls staked into manicured grass, the air inside cool and faintly perfumed with leather from the catalog-bound programs stacked at the entrance. 20 cars had been consigned to the sale. The 20th sat behind a velvet rope at the end of the tent, and most early arrivals walked past it without stopping. Pre-auction estimates published in the catalog had placed it at $800,000 to $1.2 million. Figures the trade press had called conservative, and which the room was about to test. Marcus had driven up the coast the night before with Roy following in the truck. They had checked into a motel 2 miles from the estate and slept without ceremony. The final 10 days before the consignment deadline had been the quietest work of the entire 30, not because there was less to do, but because the work had narrowed to a precision that required silence. Marcus had photographed every component against a measured scale. Cross-referenced the Gurney Westlake head castings against the factory ledger photocopies Thomas Vreeland had provided, and written the condition notes in his small, level handwriting. 1 observation per line. Nothing embellished. Roy had handled the final paint correction, working as the factor under a single shop light until the surface held a depth that was not restoration so much as revelation. What was underneath had always been there. They had only removed what was not. Hale's demolition order had been signed and logged on day 30, the date she had named in the original contract. It was by then irreversible. The car was no longer hers to recall. She came to Monterey anyway. Marcus saw her from across the tent when the doors opened. Pale gray jacket. Two men he did not recognize, looking at the car with an expression he could not easily read from that distance. He did not go over. He found his seat near the back and set his catalog on his knee and waited. The auctioneer moved through the first 19 lots with practiced efficiency. Then he called lot 20 and the tent went quiet in a different way. Thomas Vreeland's certification letter was read aloud by the auctioneer's assistant. Slowly, each line given its full weight, the room listened. The opening bid came in at $600,000. It climbed past $1 million in under 2 minutes, past 1.8 in 4, and the hammer fell at $2.3 million. In a silence that lasted just long enough to feel like held breath before the room exhaled all at once. Marcus did not stand. He sat with his catalog open on his knee and watched the auctioneer's assistant place a sold placard beside the velvet rope. Hale found him near the exit 20 minutes later. The certainty he remembered from the storage lot was gone from her expression, and when she spoke, her voice had changed register entirely. "I misjudged it," she said. 4 words. Then she told him she would like to discuss future acquisitions, that her company had 17 more facilities scheduled for liquidation, and that she believed there was a professional arrangement worth exploring. Marcus listened until she was finished. He told her he appreciated it and that he had his daughter's school schedule to work around. He would be in touch if the timing made sense. He left the tent and found Roy waiting by the truck with the thermos. They drove home in the dark. The garage light was still burning when Marcus pulled into the driveway just after midnight. Roy had switched it on before they left 3 days earlier and had not thought to turn it off, and it threw a long yellow rectangle across the concrete apron and onto the dead grass at the edge of the yard. Marcus sat in the truck for a moment after he cut the engine. The neighborhood was still. A sprinkler ticked somewhere down the block, slow and automatic, indifferent to the hour. He let himself in through the side door and stood in the kitchen, listening. The house had the particular quiet of a child deeply asleep, a quality of stillness different from ordinary silence, denser somehow, more complete. He set his keys on the counter beside a drawing Maisie had left there, a crayon rendering of a long red car with enormous wheels and a figure standing beside it that he understood to be himself, his name written underneath in careful, uneven letters. He looked at it for a moment. Then he checked on her. She was on her back with the stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, its worn ear folded against her cheek the way it always was, her breathing slow and even and entirely unconcerned with auction tents and hammer prices and the opinions of people in linen jackets. He stood in the doorway, then pulled her door to and went back to the kitchen. Claire had taught him to look carefully. Not at cars specifically, not at objects at all in the beginning, but at things people had decided were finished, decided were past their usefulness. She had explained once, in the patient way she had when she was teaching him something she considered important, that most people look for what they expected to find. The discipline, she had said, was in looking for what was actually there. He had carried that into every shop he had ever worked. He had carried it into the storage lot on a Tuesday morning when a woman in a camel coat had laughed at 20 cars in the rain. The discipline was not a gift. It was not instinct. It was a thing that had been taught to him by someone who was no longer there to see what it had produced, and he held that fact quietly, without grief and without ceremony, the way a person holds something that has become simply true. He turned off the garage light before he went to bed. The yard went dark. The sprinkler ticked on down the block, steady and unhurried, marking nothing in particular. Some people looked at what they expected. Others looked at what was there. That difference, quiet and undramatic, was the whole of it.